Steve would have wanted this cloud to lift for Apple and our focus to return to the work that he loves so much. So it's with that spirit that we wanted to get the entire company together today to celebrate Steve's extraordinary life and the many accomplishments he had across his life. People all over the world have been deeply moved by his passing, and many have spoke of what he meant to them. You've probably seen characterizations. He's been called a visionary, a creative genius, a rebel, a nonconformist, an original, the greatest CEO ever, the best innovator of all time, the ultimate entrepreneur.
Hey, this is Web Suspect, and welcome to Geeking Out. I may start a new channel, and this may become a regular part of my channel. I had an interesting experience about 15 or 13 years ago. I got to work for Computer City under Tandy Corporation. At the time, they were America's #1 computer retail, doing about $1 billion a year in sales. Working at a prototype store, and I had a unique job of working as a software specialist, but I was told I was interesting because I knew software and hardware. And I had a really good time working for Computer City. I'd get up in the morning, happy to go to work, happy to come home, and I always asked a lot of questions, and the techs and the different people in the store were always happy to answer my questions, and I learned more in the 6 months than I did in college and everything else. So the basis of my broadcast this week is there is a Microsoft store opening at Columbia on the 12th. Well, actually 48 hours before I got the memo that there was a Microsoft store opening in Columbia, I went to Hardee's to get a cheeseburger after I was painting at my mom's house, and I got to meet a very interesting person who works in the computer field. And we spent, half an hour geeking out and talking about Android and different computer systems, and he hinted about what he was working on, and it was just a really exciting experience in my time. After Computer City failed, I just felt terrible. I went around trying to get other jobs. I applied for a job at Microprose, which is a software developer, and a lot of other places, some government agencies. I did census for a while. And as many of you know, at the time I had a lump in the back of my head. So the real focus of that whole thing was going through the process of getting that cut out. And as you just saw earlier, I had a little introduction to Steve Jobs' funeral, and he died of cancer about 2 years ago. And I'm really not sure, even in that whole process, why some people die from cancer and some people don't. I don't know if it's something in them or the foods we eat or the water or not, but Steve Jobs had a very treatable form of cancer, pancreatic cancer, which is usually not treatable, and he fought a long battle with it, and ultimately, even though there was some rough spots with Steve Jobs and some high spots, that the world lost a really great person, and there was good things about Apple and bad things. I didn't really like their paywall scheme they were working on, but we'll get more into the good and the bad today. We're going to get into red and blue, but actually there's a third player, and that's Microsoft and Google Android. So as we move along to this little spreadsheet, we'll go into some of the statistics. At the time, Computer City was #1's retailer. They were doing $1 billion a year. Now, just from Steve Jobs working with Apple over the last 10 years, at the time he came into Apple in 1998, Apple Computers was 30 days from bankruptcy. 30 days from bankruptcy. He introduced Steve Jobs. What people ask, what all these people, and I'm just going over what they did. I'm not trying to add more or less to it. What Steve Jobs did was bring iTunes to Apple. iTunes helped rehabilitate Apple. He came out with the candy-colored Apple computers that we all remember, the clamshell and all that, and which wasn't terribly successful, and he opened Apple stores. And I'm going to play a real quick video clip if I can find it of Steve Jobs opening the Apple Store. So I'll just clip through it through the top. I don't see it here. So okay, we're gonna go into sales here. I may skip around a little bit. All right, currently Apple stock has been failing the last year. The last few months it's been doing a little better. It's $93 a share. It was much higher. And as you can see, Google stock is much higher. It's almost as if Google is stealing tech stocks from Apple as far as investors. I would say at the time of Steve Jobs' death, and this is just a guess, Apple was about $250 a share. Google was about $250 a share. And I would say that Google has just sucked that money right out of Apple, probably from their Android phone, and I'll get more into that. I would say within the last year, and I was going to do a video, I can't remember, unless Apple changes something about how they're doing business, they're probably going to go back to the point where they were when Steve Jobs left Apple. And Steve Jobs learned a lot about failures at Apple, projects he wanted to do to compete, like Next Computer, which brought them back. And I'll be talking more about that. Tim Cook. Steve Woz has been asked about Steve Cook. Steve Cook's net worth is $500 million, and his salary compensation package is somewhere around $378 billion. Now, when I talked to this person this week, I mentioned that Computer City was doing $1 billion a year and paying $100 million salary to their CEOs. Now, if you're paying a huge salary to your CEO, like with Steve Jobs, it has to be commensurate with the money the company's making. So if your company is losing money, then you can't keep paying your CEO a huge salary. That being said, I'm sure that Steve Jobs didn't have a salary of $100 million when he came back to Apple. And we see here $1 salary. In fact, I would say he probably was making $1 a year when he came back with the attitude that Apple was going to be successful. And then after Apple was successful, they paid him a huge salary. All right. So now we're going to look. We looked at Apple stock, $93 a share. The date is 6/9/2004, June 9th, 2014. And we've looked at Google stock. Now we're going to look at Microsoft stock. So we see on the bottom end of the range of this, even though over the years Microsoft had 2 or 3 stock splits in the first 10 years, from 1980 to the early 90s, Microsoft had several stock splits as well as Intel. Now it's evening out, and we even have a list of competing stocks. IBM, $186 a share. Oracle, $42 a share. Hewlett Packard, which Steve Woz left to start Apple, is at $33 a share. And you can always see these trends along the years where companies rise and fall. Cisco, which has been kind of raped by the Chinese over the years. And here is a breakdown of who owns what share of the market. Android owns 51% of the market, Apple 41%, and Microsoft 3%, Nokia 2%, and BlackBerry 3.1%. We got some other numbers here. I think that's probably the most accurate. Here this chart has iOS and Android kind of even. Android's copied several of the patents. If you remember, before Steve Jobs died, he had filed 6 or 9 patents on the iPhone, and he had set up some lawsuits on Android, but surprisingly enough, he went after the makers of the cell phones and not so much Google. I think I probably would have gone after Google more. Now, as far as solutions, I've heard complaints from Wozniak, and I would have to agree as to why I would pick a Android phone over an iPhone. The iPhone 5S is priced somewhere between $600 and $900, and the C maybe $100 less, $400 to $800 maybe. And I have an interesting phone up here for people to look at. Now there's a couple of them here, but this is a Android. This is a Hero phone, which is a Chinese clone. Now if you look at it, it looks exactly like the iPhone, but you open it and there are 2 SIM card slots for full-size SIM cards and an SD card slot. Now I know somebody who got one of these phones for $200, and it's a great phone. It runs Android. It does all the basic functions as the iPhone. You can load apps. You can look at YouTube or Facebook or Twitter. Check the weather. Now, it would be very easy for Apple to offer, when you get the iPhone with those prices. And a lot of people say that the iPhone is $200 to make, but then you can't take the battery out when you get it or any of this other stuff. That goes back to Steve Wozniak's story about the Apple II being their only product for 10 years, where you could upgrade the Apple II, and then moving into the Macintosh, which he says was a huge failure just because from the fact that it didn't sell. I think the Macintosh was successful as a computer for business people, but not really for schools and things like that. And what I would suggest is Apple look at something between the cross between the iPhone and this picture I have here of the MacBook, the unibody construction where everything is modular, and I even have some pictures up of some ATX formats, which is modular computers. Now I know that Apple has been kind of moving, and it's sort of been their biggest flaw, has been moving towards planned obsolescence. In other words, you get the phone, you can't change the battery, you can't upgrade the memory. However, your time in the system for usage is low because you can't upgrade the phone. And also repairing it when it's broke is difficult. And, people who work maybe in the DoD want to be able to take the battery out, or, a lot of things. If the iPhone was more modular, say kind of like the unibody MacBook, that would be interesting if you could change the camera or change the motherboard in the phone or the battery, or even just between models if your phone broke and you could change some of the parts and make it easier to fix. I think that would be a good thing for Apple. Now the question is, in their marketing strategy behind the closed doors, when Apple's having their discussion, is it worthwhile for Apple to charge $900 for a phone and make $700 profit if they're losing market share? Android is making a $200 phone and selling it for $200. Is it worth it for Android to make a $200 phone with Google and sell it for nothing and have more of the market share? Now here's something to think about. Even though Android's not making anything, or Google's not making anything off of Android, which is kind of a poison pill, they're getting 46% of the share, and people are buying their stock. So my personal opinion is Tim Cook's salary needs to be cut to be commensurate with their profits. That's number one. Number two is the Apple board needs to sit down and they need to decide reprice point their iPhone and say, okay, how much do we want to